There's an ancient Ethiopian text called the Kebra Nagast, which has an awful lot to say about the Ark of the Covenant. So we're going to have a look at this text and examine it and read it and look at it from the perspective of it ending up in Ethiopia and the journey it took through Egypt down and into Ethiopia to where it resides today. Prior to the section of the Kebra Nagast I'm going to read to you came the story of the Queen of Sheba and how she was seduced by Solomon. She went back to her homeland, had a baby, and he, the son of King Solomon, returned to his father. And this is where our story kind of starts, because he and his associates essentially steal the ark. Although the story of the Queen of Sheba and her son are very interesting stories, they are not where we're going to start. We're going to start reading at the point at which the ark has been stolen, and they are proceeding to work out how they're going to get it to Ethiopia. Then they loaded the wagons, the horses, and the mules in order to depart, and they set out on their journey, and they continued to travel on. And this is where it gets really, really interesting, because it later goes on to say that no man hauled his wagon, but whether it was men, horses, mules, or loaded camels, each was raised above the ground to the height of a cubit. And all those who rode upon beasts were lifted up along with the beasts to the height of one span of a man. And everyone travelled in the wagons like a ship on the sea when the wind bloweth, like a bat through the air, and like an eagle when his body glideth above the wind. Thus did they travel. Basically, what this is saying in the narrative is that once they had the Ark of the Covenant, the whole team of people just floated in the air and traveled to Egypt. So to me, this very much sounds like technology. The way the text is written, you can assume they were either on some kind of floating platform or something that was supporting them, or even some kind of like magic flying carpet, some kind of platform that they are traveling on. So we'll jump now a little bit further on in the text to the time when they actually reach Egypt. And the people of Ethiopia, so that's the team of people returning to Ethiopia, but it also includes the nobles' sons and daughters that were sent by Solomon. So the people, they took flutes and blew horns, they beat drums and played on pipes, and the river of Egypt was moved and astonished at the sound of their songs and their rejoicings, and with them were the mingled shouts and outcries of gladness. Then the idols, that's the idols of the Egyptians, which they'd made with their own hands, and were in the form of men or dogs, cats, high towers, also the figures of birds, things of gold and silver, they all fell down and were broken into pieces. So all these statues falling down and all the buildings falling down and towers and things, it sounds very much like what I saw on the island of Elephantine. It looks like something like that had happened there, that everything just fell over. And it also happens to be one of the places they say that the Ark of the Covenant resided for a while. It doesn't say how long they stayed in Egypt, but it does sound like the Egyptians were pretty happy when they were leaving. So I'll just read the next passage. Then the wagons rose up, and they set out early in the morning, and the people sang songs to Zion, and they were all raised up the space of a cubit. And as the people of the country of Egypt bade them farewell, they passed before them like shadows, and those people worshipped them, for they saw Zion move in the heavens like the sun. And they all ran chariot of Zion, some in front and some behind her. So this certainly sounds like the Egyptians were very happy to be seeing the Ark of the Covenant leave them and stop making a lot of mess in Egypt. The next stop after they leave Egypt is as follows. They then came to Al-Amar, which is in Eritrea at the Red Sea. And here's where they give us a very unexpected little nugget of information. They say that this is the place where Moses parted the Red Sea. So it says that it was in Eritrea, which is quite different to other places suggested that this occurred. Eritrea makes sense in terms of this journey, but it just doesn't make sense that they're referring back to Moses in terms of it. So maybe there's something that we don't quite understand about this reference. It does make sense that after they leave Egypt, they pass through Sudan area and they go to Eritrea. But the next passage where they go into the water also doesn't make sense. But let's just have a look at it. It says, the sea worshipped Zion, so that's the Ark of the Covenant, and their wagons were raised above the waves for a space of 3 cubits. So it looks like they're somewhere out in the sea, just floating above the waves. And before this, they actually explain why it's different when Moses was doing it to when they're doing it. Okay, so wherever they were in the water, they then returned to land. And this is what it says about it. And there was joy at the sea of Etria, and the people of Ethiopia who went forth to the sea rejoiced exceedingly, and with a greater joy than did Israel when they came out of Egypt. So from Eritrea, it seems like they went to the land of Midian, which I can't find, and then came to the country of Belontos, which apparently is one of the kingdoms associated with Ethiopia, which I also cannot find. And the text says, then they encamped there because they had reached the border of their country with glory and joy, without tribulation on the way, in a wagon of the Spirit, by the night of heaven, and of Michael the archangel. And all the provinces of Ethiopia rejoiced, for Zion sent light forth like that of a sun into the darkness wherever she went. So there's a reasonable bit to unpack with this passage. First of all, we've got them finally reaching Ethiopia, and they're saying that not only did they float in the air on their way, but it was aided by the Archangel Michael, and that the Ark of the Covenant shone like a great light through the darkness wherever it went. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting. At this point in the story, it doesn't go on to take us into Ethiopia. So the story temporarily stops here while it goes back and it has a look at what's happening with King Solomon. This is the time when King Solomon realizes that the ark is gone. So we will continue our story at that point because this is where he's trying to catch them. So he's trying to follow their trail and get to them. So now we can start looking at what the ancient texts have to say about this part of the story. So this is what the texts say when they realize that maybe the Ark of the Covenant was stolen. It says, woe be unto us if our sons have carried off our Lady, the holy, the heavenly Zion, the tabernacle of the law of God. So this is how they referred to the Ark of the Covenant. So now they decide to check to see if it is missing. And the king asks the priest, did you check? Did you see if it's there? And the priest says, I did not, Lord. It had 3 coverings over it. And I took off the outermost one and dressed Zion in the covering which thou gave me. And I brought the other one to thee. So it's at this point that we realize that the Ark of the Covenant had 3 protective covers over it. And once it was stolen, it either had no protective cover over it, or it just had the one that King Solomon had given to his son. So hence it was once again quite dangerous. So they go and check, and once they take off the 3 protective covers, they discover that all that's underneath is the fake ark. The story then goes on to say that King Solomon then rose up and commanded the herald to cry out and the soldiers to blow the trumpets, so that the people might go forth and pursue the men of the land of Ethiopia. And if they overtook them, they were to seize his son and bring him back with the tabernacle Zion, and slay all others by the sword. So we know from this passage that King Solomon is very serious about getting back the Ark of the Covenant, and he doesn't want to take any prisoners, but he does want his son back. And King Solomon rose up in wrath and set out to pursue the men of Ethiopia. He sent out mounted horsemen so that they might go ahead of him to find out where they were and return and bring him news of them. The horsemen journeyed on and came to the country of Egypt, where the men of Ethiopia had encamped with their king. At this point, they could in fact be talking about Elephantine Island, or they could be talking about somewhere else that the Ethiopians made camp at. But in my mind, it's probably the area on Elephantine, which is designated where they did camp. So the soldiers on horseback that went ahead of King Solomon started asking the Egyptians questions about the group that had passed through. And they said, "Some days ago, certain men of Ethiopia passed here. They traveled swiftly in wagons like the angels, and they were swifter than the eagles of the heavens. Then the king's soldiers said unto him, How many days ago is it since they left you? The men of Egypt said unto them, This is the 9th day since they left." So King Solomon is either just entering into Egypt, or he's still on his way to Egypt, but the Pharaoh sends a messenger to King Solomon, because he knows that he's coming, with gifts. And this is what the text has to say about that. Solomon the king made haste to question him even before he had presented his gifts and credentials, and said unto him, Hast thou seen men of Ethiopia fleeing by this route? After a bit of explanation regards where the dignitary had been and looked and spoken to, he gave an interesting answer to King Solomon. Not only did he confirm that the Ethiopians had passed this way, but he also said they made an awful lot of noise and they floated like heavenly creatures. So the noise from all these flutes and trumpets and things must have something to do with the technology and how they raise it up into the air. But let us continue with what is said about the Ethiopians as they travel through. Those who were in the cities and towns were witnesses that when these men came into the land of Egypt, our gods and the gods of the king fell down and were dashed into pieces, and the towers of the idols were likewise broken into fragments. And they asked the priests of the gods, the diviners of Egypt, the reason why our gods had fallen down. And they said unto us, The tabernacle of the God of Israel, which came down from heaven, is with them and will abide in their country forever. It is because of this, when they came into the land of Egypt, our gods were broken into fragments. And this sounds like a very good description of what I saw in on Elephantine Island. It was like everything had just been shaken and fallen and dropped. And it's considering how close all these things were to where they say that the Ark of the Covenant was hanging out for a little while, it comes as absolutely no surprise whatsoever that it may have caused some of the devastation. Of course, Some of this may be from other reasons as well, but it does seem like an interesting coincidence. The next section is really just Solomon lamenting, i.e., crying about the situation, and then trying to rationalize that it's God's will and that sort of thing. So it doesn't really get into anything particularly exciting until it gets to this bit. The angel of God appeared unto him openly and said unto him, As for thyself, thou shalt build the house of God, and it shall be glory and support for thee. And why is this so interesting? Well, who was this angel? And why was the angel giving King Solomon directions as to, just go back and get on with building a house for God? The texts later go on to state that it was decided that this whole thing was to be kept a big secret and that they were going to pretend that the Ark of the Covenant was still with them. The texts also go into some of the interesting history around the Ark. So the third part of the story is him crying and being reminded of the history of the Ark of the Covenant and how it is God's will that the Ark is wherever it happens to be at the time. So let's just have a look at the story. Concerning Zion in olden times, by the way, Zion is one of the names that they gave to the Ark of the Covenant. In the days of Eli the priest, before our fathers had asked for a king, the Philistines carried away the tabernacle of the law of God and brought it into their city and set it in the house of their god Dagon. And Dagon was broken to pieces and destroyed, and it became like dust. Their land became a desert through mice, which ate up all of their food from their land, and the people suffered from boils and sores. The Philistines then gathered together their priests, magicians, and stargazers, and they said unto them, How can we relieve ourselves of these sores and the tribulations which have come upon us and upon our country? And those magicians meditated and withdrew themselves to be alone, and they brought their magical instruments and pondered and considered and planned how they could relieve them from the tribulation of their city and of their persons. They discovered that this punishment had come upon them and their city because of Zion. Then they went to their kings and their governors, and they said unto them, All things have befallen you through the heavenly Zion, the tabernacle of the law of God. And now this is how ye will take her back into her city, and her country, and her house. By no means send her away empty, but give her an offering so that she may forgive you your sins and cast away your tribulations when she is returned to her city. But if you will not send her back to her city, no good will come by forcing her to live with you, but ye shall continue to be punished until ye are destroyed. The king and the governors then said unto their priests, What gift ought we to give her, and how shall we send her back? Find and tell us what we must do. And the priests of the Philistines took counsel together, and they said to their king and to the governors, Make for her, according to the heads of your houses, 60 images of mice in gold, since mice have destroyed our land, and 60 images of the member of a man, since your own persons have suffered from sores and boils on your members. So the Ark of the Covenant, in addition to all the other things it has inside it, gets some solid gold mice put in it and a whole heap of solid gold members put inside it. And then they theorize that if they just attach it to a cart and let a couple of camels wander the desert, and if the camels go straight back to the Israelites, then maybe all will be forgiven. So, as it turns out, the camels just went straight to the Israelites, and all was forgiven. But the reason this is so interesting as part of the story is because of all the damage that the ark did while it was with the Philistines. And it just happens to be exactly the same as all the damage that it did as it was passing through Egypt. So that's the main reason why this is quite an interesting little clippet or snippet of this story from the Kebra Nagast. The next part of our story is the big secret, a secret so big that even today many say that it never happened. So this part of the story starts with Solomon having not being able to retrieve the Ark of the Covenant from his son, who had escaped through Egypt and on to Ethiopia, and him returning to his home to basically mourn the loss of the Ark. When he discusses it with his senior officials, they all agree that it's best that nobody else knows that the Ark was not retrieved. So let's get back to the Kebra Nagast and what it has to say. Solomon wept in the habitation of the heavenly Zion, the tabernacle of the law of God, and they all wept with him. And after a little while they held their peace. King Solomon said unto them, Cease ye, so that the uncircumcised people may not boast themselves over us, and say, Their glory is taken away, and God hath forsaken them. Reveal ye not anything else to alien folk. Let us set up these boards which are nailed here, and let them cover them with gold, and let us decorate them in the manner of the Lady Zion, and let us lay the books of the law inside it. As for us, none of us will transgress thy word, and we will not inform of any other people that Zion hath been taken away from us. And they established this covenant in the house of God, the elders of Israel, with King Solomon unto this day. And Solomon lived for 11 years after the taking away of Zion from him. In a nutshell, the false ark of the covenant, the Lady Zion, was then made to look like the real version of the ark, and everyone kept their mouths shut, and no one spoke of the fact that the Ark of the Covenant was no longer with them. It was just a replica, and that seems to have been a secret kept even till today, because it is believed that the Ark of the Covenant was removed from the Temple of Solomon at a later date than the one given by the Ethiopians. Let's start at the Kebra Nagast and the king of Ethiopia about to enter his homeland. And the king of Ethiopia returned to his country with joy and gladness, and marching along with their songs, their pipes, and their chariots like an army of heavenly beings. The Ethiopians arrived from Jerusalem at the city of Wakrub in a single day. Now, this is where the story gets a bit weird, because we've just been through the whole process of their journey from King Solomon down through Egypt, through probably the Sudan, and to Eritrea, and then to the border of Ethiopia. So this statement doesn't actually make a lot of sense. And maybe it's a mistranslation or something else, but it does kind of make the story seem a bit weird. And they sent messengers to announce their arrival to Makeda, the Queen of Ethiopia, and to report to her how they had found every good thing, and how her son had become king, and how they had brought the heavenly Zion. Obviously, this would have been a time of big parties and announcements and rejoicing, and so the Kebra Nagast goes on to say, Then the hearts of the people shone at the sight of Zion, the tabernacle of the law of God. And the people of Ethiopia cast aside their idols and worshipped their Creator, the God who had made them. And the men of Ethiopia loved the righteousness and justice that God loveth. They forsook their former fornications and chose purity in the camp, and that was the sight of the heavenly Zion. They forsook the pleasure of the gods who were devils and chose the service and praise of God. The daughters of Jerusalem suffered disgrace, and the daughters of Ethiopia were held in honor. For God accepted the peoples who had been cast away and rejected Israel, for Zion was taken away from them, and she came into the country of Ethiopia. For wherever God is pleased for her to dwell, there is her habitation. So from the Ethiopian's perspective, the Ark of the Covenant is definitely in Ethiopia. The next part of the story is about him formally being given the role of King of Ethiopia and a few of the rules that go along with this big change in Ethiopia. So after all the partying and law-giving was done, which was about 3 months after he arrived back into the country, he started on a campaign of going to war against various other countries. And of course, with the Ark of the Covenant, he won. So here's what it says in the Kebra Nagast. King David II, so that's Menelik, the Ethiopian king, waged war wherever he pleaseth, and no man conquered him, but whosoever attacked him was conquered. For Zion himself made the strength of the enemy to be exhausted. But King David II, with his armies and all those who obeyed his word, ran by with chariots and without pain, a hunger or thirst, without sweat and exhaustion, and travelling in one day a distance that took 3 months to traverse. So what they're saying here is that thanks to the Ark of the Covenant, they had all this amazing facility to travel around, so fly through the air very quickly to get to where they wanted to go. They were never tired, they had plenty of food, and basically everything came to them easily. So it says that they lacked for nothing whatsoever of the things which they asked God through the tabernacle of the law of God to give them, i.e., the Ark of the Covenant. For he dwelt with her, and his angel directed her, for she was his habitation. This passage reinforces the concept that the Ark of the Covenant was a communication mechanism to God, and that the Ethiopians were now able to do their communicating and ask for what they wanted and get answers and also get directions as to what God wanted them to do, who he wanted them to go to war against, etc. But if you check out my other episodes on the technology that is about the Ark of the Covenant, you will see that, in my mind, it's certainly not God that they're talking to. It's someone else, someone who has an ulterior motive and who is quite keen to see people wage war on each other, to hurt each other, and to do some pretty bad things. Graham Hancock describes where the Ark has been residing in various places and where it resides now.
And it's here that I discovered that one of the islands, an island called Karnakirkos, has a strong association with Judaism.
But there's also a TV series on it as well. But the final resting place, according to the Ethiopians, is this church here, and it's apparently deep underground. I'll also be doing an abbreviated version of this whole story in my shorts, so you can check that out as well.